recorded and we'll get started. So, like I say, thanks very much for coming, everybody. My name is Adam. I am one of the careers consultants as part of the careers team. And what we're going to do over the next, let's say, half hour, 45 minutes, something like that, is think about work experience. And I am going to be covering a few things that you can do to basically get some, whether that's stuff directly related to your degree or more likely other stuff. But what I'm going to try and do over the course of this session is reframe it. I want you to think about work experience from the point of view of an employer. Okay, now that might sound like a distinction without a difference, but think about it in terms of what an employer is going to value, right? Why is a particular piece of work experience important to an employer or valuable to an employer? Think about it from the perspective of what employers want. Now, on a personal level, I used to work in recruitment, so I kind of did this for a living for a while. And on a very basic level, right, when people say employers want experience, that is true, but what they want is experience of certain things. They want experience of doing things. They want experience of, not to put too fine a point on it, skills, right? Now, here's some sort of a broad list of skills, really. You can get a really good sense of what an employer wants in terms of experience, but particularly in terms of skills from job descriptions, person specifications, which is one of the reasons that work experience is so valuable. It gives you ammunition. That's what I usually say anyway. Stuff to talk about at interview level, at application level in your CVs. However, and this might sound like a weird thing in a work experience talk, work experience isn't the only way to demonstrate these skills. That is really important to think, okay? Which, from my perspective, means that literally everything that you have done is valid, whether that's work experience that is directly related to your degree and the job that you go on to do, or whether it's something completely different. You can make it valid by demonstrating these skills. And the reason I'm hammering on this point so much is because of how recruitment works, right? When you come to an interview and when you've actually applied, it isn't common, and this goes especially for graduate roles, that employers will look for X number of years in marketing, let's say. That's not how graduate recruitment works. And broadly speaking, that's not how recruitment works in general. We're looking for you to demonstrate some of these skills. And we do that. And if we look at interviews, for just the sake of argument, we do that through questions like these. They're called competency-based questions. This is what an employer is going to ask. They're not going to say, describe your experience in marketing. They're going to say something like, give me an example of a time you've worked well as part of a team. Or give me an example of a time you've had to solve a complex problem or communicate a complicated idea. This is what I mean when I say I'm trying to reframe things, right? I am trying to get you to shift your mindset from experience to skills and how you can demonstrate those skills. Okay? You do this through evidence, or what I refer to as ammunition. Now, obviously, work experience is great. It is really valuable. And I promise you, I will show you where to find work experience. This isn't sort of bait and switch, but literally everything else is also valid. The very fact you're at university tells me you have stuff to talk about in applications, interviews. The academic context is important. Any voluntary work, extracurricular stuff, family responsibilities, work experience that you would think is maybe completely unrelated to your degree, all of it is relevant and can be made to be relevant. Because the thing is, when it comes to recruitment, and in fact, think of it yourselves. So imagine that you've got, let's say, I don't know, 150 jobs. Sorry, no, not 150 jobs. Imagine you're an employer and you are recruiting for a job and you've got 150 applications. How are you going to sift through those applications? A lot of them are going to have very similar work experience in a lot of ways, very similar academic context. So how are you going to just decide? Let's say you've got 6 spaces to interview. How are you going to do it? You can't just look at one and say, "Yeah, that's all right. I'll interview them," because you'll get to maybe 50 and have 6 people to interview already, but you've still got to look through the rest. How do you decide? The truth is, we use something like this. This is a selection grid. Along the top, we've got all the key skills that we've asked for. And that's not a mystery. They're taken directly from a job description and a person specification. And on the left-hand side, you've got the names of everybody that's applied. So could be 150 names on there. And what we do for each of those skills will give you a score. Now, you'll see I've used 1 to 4 here. It might be 1 to 5, 1 to 10. I've seen quite often people use 0 to 2, 0 being not met, 1 being partially met, 2 being fully met. And it doesn't really matter what the scale is because all those scores get added up and the top scores are the ones that get invited to interview. This is the key. Think of it like a game, right? You are trying to get the highest score. This is the board you're playing on and these are the rules, and you've got to evidence those skills. Now, this is why we want to reframe it. So if you think about how you would evidence those skills, whether you have work experience or not, it might be you have loads of work experience, but actually your evidence of influencing, let's say, comes from voluntary work. That doesn't make it any less valid. And actually, to give you an example of what we would be looking for as evidence, let's take that influencing example. You'd do something like this in your applications. Now, this is using something called the STAR technique. I don't have too much time to go into the STAR technique in detail. This is how we would suggest that you answer both interview and application questions, but you would give a concrete example taken from any experience. Now, this person here, they've done it from their extracurricular stuff when they were part of the university football team. You might think, well, that's not work experience. No, you're right. It's something else, but they've made this experience directly relevant. And just to explain what the STAR technique is, you'll see the S, the T, the A, the R on the left-hand side. That is situation, task, action, and result. So you take the question you are trying to answer. What was the situation and what was the task? What were you trying to achieve in this example? What was the action? What did you do? And how did you do it in as much detail as you can give? And then the result. What happened as a result of what you did? And you'll see this person has made another kind of experience, in this case, a voluntary experience, directly relevant because they've demonstrated the skills we're after. Okay. All of this is to say, and this is just a preamble before I show you where you can find things like work experience. If you don't find work experience, or if you don't find work experience that is directly related to your degree, then that is not the end of the world. There are ways that you can evidence particular skills, whatever it is you do, whether it's from something like part-time work. I mean, these are the typical jobs that students do while they are with us. These are the part-time roles that we see most often, and most of them aren't directly related to a degree field. And that, from what I've just told you, should be fine because it's the skills we're trying to evidence. I actually had it a couple of weeks ago where a student came up to me and said, I really want work experience, but I want it in engineering. I want a part-time job in engineering that isn't graduate level because obviously I'm not qualified. Now, if you think about that for a minute, you realize that if it does exist, that's going to be vanishingly rare. What we then talked about was how that person could make their experience directly relevant. All of this stuff is to say, whatever work experience you can get, whether it is direct work experience that's paid, work shadowing, voluntary work, extracurricular stuff, please don't feel like it's not valid because I promise you that it is. Okay, so with that said, here are some of the ways that I would suggest trying to find work experience. This isn't going to be everything by any means, for obvious reasons. Can't go into literally every single thing that you could do to find work experience, but these are the things that I would suggest are a good way of starting and will cover all your bases. And as with any job search, the key here is to remember that not everything, or rather, there is not one specific way of looking for work experience that beats everything else. You have to go multi-channel. So what we're going to do here with you guys, I'm going to create a rotation of activity, a series of things that you need to be doing regularly, and not just one thing, but a little bit of different stuff every day. And the first thing that I want you guys to do is check Career Connect. Hopefully you're all aware of this. You're all at this event, which is where the Career Connect was what was used to advertise it. So hopefully you're aware. But you'll see on there that if you search opportunities, you will see literally everything that we as a service are aware of. So that is work experience, that is internships, including our own internships called MGT, Manchester Graduate Talent. So look out for those. But literally everything we're aware of is in our opportunity section. Now you can create job alerts for that. You could just check it on the regular. That is up to you. But that needs to be one of, if not the first part of your rotation. Dead simple. I'd suggest having a look, creating some alerts and seeing what comes up. Allied to that, you will also, on our web pages, so on our website, hopefully you're aware of this, find a sort of treasure trove of all the sorts of roles that we're aware of rather, that are available, and where else you could find them. So here you'll see our Finding Work Experience page, which has links to part-time jobs, internships, placements, virtual work experience, workshed, all sorts, right? And then on the next page, you'll find specific pages dedicated to all of these things. So I've just given you an example of the internships page. And you'll see on the left, we have segmented that out depending on what year you're in at university. So this again is going to be part of your rotation. So when you're looking for part-time jobs, when you're looking for work experience or whatever it is, do a little bit something different every day. But the other thing I'm going to suggest is be as focused in your search as possible, right? And that includes even using what you would consider sort of general strategies in a very targeted, more effective way. So for those who aren't aware, the biggest job website in the UK, it's a website called Indeed. And there are others, things like Total Jobs, Reed. They all work pretty much the same way. So I'd still suggest using them, but they can be quite frustrating. Let's say you were looking for, I don't know, a marketing internship. If you put marketing internship into Indeed or any search bar on a job website, what it will do is look for everything with the word marketing in, everything with the word internship in, and throw that up on the screen, which can be really frustrating because you'll get loads of jobs and opportunities come up, most of which not particularly helpful. So don't do that. What I'm going to suggest is a little bit advanced, but actually it's super easy. Use what we call a Boolean string. This is what I mean when I say Boolean string. It's a weird term, but basically all it means is, as well as your search terms, which would be marketing internship, use instructions. So you'll see at the bottom there, if I put marketing and then and in capital letters, then the word internship, that looks for that combination. It's more specific, it's more focused. So hopefully you can see how that might be a little bit more powerful. If, on the other hand, I use speech marks or quotation marks, as in the next example, marketing intern, that looks for that specific phrase and nothing else. And then the next one, you could even get a bit, what would be the word, a bit fancy. You'd say part-time and then use things like brackets, then marketing or communications to be even more focused, but still quite broad in that you are looking for different ways of saying the word marketing. Now, you'll get these slides, so don't worry about taking too many notes. But here is your sort of guide to the instructions, what this does. And what I would suggest, especially if you're looking for work experience, think about the sorts of words that might denote work experience. Things like internship, work shadowing, entry level, all sorts, part-time, anything that would potentially be relevant. And then experiment with these instructions. Find the string, and this is a little bit of homework, but find the string of search terms and instructions that is getting you in Indeed or Reed or whichever job website you prefer, the most relevant, most useful results. Then what you can do is set up a job alert. And to show, I guess, how powerful this is, here you'll see on the right hand side, I've done basically what everybody does. I've just put marketing into the search bar. 610 jobs. And for me, I was looking for graduate marketing roles here. Most of them were not useful. I was getting a lot of sales, a lot of door-to-door stuff. It just wasn't helpful, right? On the left-hand side, I've done a really basic one, marketing and graduate. And you'll see only 19 jobs, but all of them were jobs that a marketing grad could apply to. This is why I'm suggesting this. This is a bit of a life skill, whether it's for work experience, which I'd suggest you try, but also when you eventually come to looking for grad jobs, this can be super powerful. Okay. The other thing I would suggest, and this goes to, I guess, that more focused approach, create a list of organizations that you are interested in. Now, you might think that's fairly easy. However, if I were to ask you, what are the top employers in your sector, as an example, hopefully you're going to be able to answer that. If I then say, all right, what are the SMEs in your sector in Manchester? What are the smaller businesses in, I don't know, construction? That's harder. However, there's a really quick and easy way to do it. If you put Manchester construction, let's stick with construction. If you put that into Google, you'll get a lot of results, most of which not great. But if you then switch to Google Maps, what you can do is immediately get a list of organizations in the construction sector in and around Manchester. And the reason I like doing this is because you can do it for anywhere. So let's say that you're not really that bothered about living or staying in Manchester. You might want to do it. You might want to go back home. Maybe you live in London, or maybe you're just open to moving anywhere. You can do this for any geography and really quickly and easily get a sense of your local employers. Now, after that, you need to do a bit of research on them. Do they have work experience? Are they people you can speak to? Do they have an internship program? If they're a smaller organization, probably not. Internship programs tend to be with the much larger organizations, but maybe they have work experience available. Maybe you could just have a chat with somebody. So all of this stuff gives you really good labor market info, but also can help in your job search, can help in your search for work experience. This is a much more structured approach that I'm suggesting, but honestly, it will bear fruit. It takes a bit of time, but it will save you a lot of time later on. As I said at the top, everyone, if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and I'll get to them as we go. I know I'm going at a bit of a pace, so do shout up if you have any questions. So after that, so remember, we are building a rotation of activity. You've got your target list. You've done your job search on Indeed. You've automated that side of things. You've checked Career Connect. You set up a job alert there. Great, all good. The next thing I want you to do is use a website called Prospects. Prospects is a really useful website. I describe it as a bit of a cheat sheet for students and graduates in a lot of ways. They host their own graduate jobs, which you can see here, some of which are going to be things like internships, placements. But, and this is why I like it so much, Prospects is a treasure trove of information on different roles. If you look at any of what they call their job profiles, you'll see a breakdown of what the job actually is. So, what to expect, things like, the day to day, the responsibilities, the salary, which, always nice to know, get a benchmark, but also things like the skills, the employers, and where to find work experience for these roles. So if you do have a specific thing in mind, I would really encourage you to get on Prospects, have a look at these different job profiles and see what it's coming up with. What skills do you need? How are you going to get them? What work experience would be useful? Are there links on these pages? And I promise you there are, to find that sort of work experience. Again, something to add to your rotation. This can be really, really valuable. In addition, a couple of other websites that I want to sort of highlight. First one kind of does what it says. It's called Student Job. This is a repository of jobs that are directly relevant to students, whereabouts you are in your sort of professional journey, if I can use a horrible phrase. But you'll see it segments them. So it segments them out to part-time jobs, summer jobs, internships, graduate jobs, placements. So again, a more targeted way of doing your job search. So again, another thing to add to your rotation and can be really valuable, because while it says, I think that 3,288 on there, that is actually kind of out of date, even since I created this. So the last time I checked was about a week ago. There were over 5,000 roles on there. You can segment it by where you want to work as well. So can be a really useful resource. Adding to your rotation again, this is more for graduate jobs, but you will find, as you can see, jobs, internships, grad schemes, first year programs, training programs. This is Target Jobs. This is probably the biggest graduate job website in the UK. It's actually what's linked to Career Connect. So again, something else to add to your rotation. This is a really powerful tool. You'll find a lot of larger, I'd say, opportunities on there. And like I said earlier, a lot of things like internship programs, particularly, they tend to be with larger employers. So this is definitely something that you need to add to your rotation. And then the last two, because I know I'm throwing websites at you, and even now I'm not getting through all the potential websites you could use to find work experience, but two really good ones. This one's called HireIn, used to be called Rate My Placement, which kind of does what it says. They've expanded it quite significantly, and you can see there's all sorts of opportunities on there, particularly for university students. They'll have internships, placements, but then it also goes to things like graduate jobs, vacation schemes, insight days. They've segmented it by sector. So I would really, again, encourage you to add this to your rotation. Check what roles are on there. Not necessarily on every day, not maybe even every week, maybe every couple of weeks, but on the regular, you're checking these websites. And the last one, and this is possibly one of the most well known for these sorts of things, is a website called Student Ladder. So again, a repository of all sorts of information and all sorts of actual opportunities, and helpfully at the top they've segmented it by apprenticeships, internships, and then graduate roles. So another thing to add to your rotation, and I'm very aware that I'm giving you quite a lot to do. Okay, now before I guess get into wrapping up, because we are approaching the end, there are a couple of things I want to say. So I've given you a lot to do there, and it can feel a bit overwhelming. The thing I would say is, while you are applying for these things, try and keep a record of what you're applying to. Now I've put on here a sort of version of an application diary. Okay. The reason I want you to keep a record of these things, first of all, it's a really good idea just to keep a record of what you've applied to, because you don't want someone to ring you up, call you, that still happens, and ask or say something like, hello, it's such and such person calling about that job or that opportunity or that internship that you applied to. And you have to say which one. Because in theory, you're going to be applying to a lot of things, right? That's not a good look. We want to keep a detailed record of what we're applying to. But also, if you do this, and I'm suggesting you keep a lot of information here, right? Two things will happen. First of all, you will be able to see at a glance your whole strategy of how you look for jobs and opportunities. In doing so, you will then see what is working and what isn't. Like, are you using a particular website? You applied to loads of stuff, but never hearing anything back. But then you're hearing back from other things. Well, maybe it's that website, and maybe you just want to discount it. Or are you sending loads of applications and hearing nothing back? Is that where you're getting stuck? Maybe that means your application strategy or the way you're applying to things isn't great. Maybe you need to come and have a chat with us. On the other hand, are you getting through to an interview stage, but you're never getting further than an interview? Then we know it's the interview technique that's the issue. But if we don't have something like this, if you don't have a sort of idea of what it is you are doing to apply for roles, then it can be really difficult to diagnose. And we've had a comment here. I personally try and download the job description too, since some companies will take down their job postings later on. That is a great technique. I was going to suggest that as well. Keeping as much detail of what you are applying to. Yes, it can help once you've applied, if you're going through to interview. If they've taken the job description down, you have nothing to use to start prepping for your interview, right? If you've kept the job description, then actually you're ahead of a lot of people. So that's a really valuable thing to do. The more detail and the more sort of structured your approach is to apply for anything, whether it is jobs, but also these internships, work experiences, the better prepared you are going to be. And often it is the most prepared person that gets the job, not always the best qualified or most experienced. And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on before we do sort of start to wrap up is, I kind of hammered it at the start, right? But obviously we want you to get some work experience. But if you don't, for whatever reason, whether you are doing a degree course where you need to be in the lab a lot. I speak to a lot of students where they simply can't get a part-time job or work experience because their degree is all consuming, or maybe your field or specific sector just doesn't really lend itself to work experience because you need to be super qualified to even get in the door. Well, that isn't the end of the world. Literally everything else can be made to be relevant. All it needs to do is demonstrate those skills. So if work experience isn't an option, it's just not working out, think about the other things you could do. Join societies, get involved in sports, volunteer. All of it can be valid. And I know that sounds like, well, yeah, you'd say that, but is it really true? I promise you it is. I interview quite a lot because I'm lucky enough or unlucky enough, depending on how you look at it, to be on a lot of recruitment panels, just in general. My favorite, and this was an interview example that someone gave, I'll never forget this one. The question was, give us an example of a time you've worked well as part of a team. And this person gave me a really good interview answer about how they work well as part of a team. And they got it from when they won a national championship for WoW. Now, for the uninitiated, WoW is World of Warcraft. It is an online computer game. They talked about how they knew their class, they were the healer, they knew where they had to be, they communicated really well. Basically, it was a really well-developed example. Now, that is not me saying that you all need to go out and play video games because that's how you're going to develop the skills. What I'm saying is you can literally make anything relevant. So yeah, if you can get work experience, great. That is fantastic ammunition. but all the other things that you could do as well are just as valid. Now I am going to stop the recording there. Thank you very much for listening. If you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And while I am sort of summing up